So remember, the basic plan of history is the 7 churches. So you got the coast of Asia Minor. So Turkey is a bit like that. And here you have Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, then you got 3 cities in the rear of each one of these. That's Thyatira, Smyrna, Sardis, Philadelphia, and there's one in the back of Sardis, which is Laodicea. It's interesting that St. John followed some geographical order when he mentioned the 7 churches. The key of these churches is the first one. That one represents the apostolic age. So you can put on your notes, number 1, first part, Ephesus. And it's called the apostolic age. It's from the AD 33 to the death of St. John, the death of the last witness of the gospel. Now, our Lord sent the apostles to all the corners of the world. So you had divided the world basically into 4 corners. Okay. So in the south went St. Matthew, St. Mark, who took care of Alexandria. St. Matthew went all the way down to Ethiopia. So they took care of of Africa. In the east went St. Thomas, Saint Simon, St. Jude, which are the other? In Jerusalem proper, you had St. James, the major. In the west, you had Saint James the Minor, and I think Saint Matthias stayed in Jerusalem, but I'm not sure. Saint Bartholomew went east and north. And west went eventually. St. Peter starts in Jerusalem, goes to Antioch. From Antioch, sends St. Mark to start the Patriarchate of Alexandria, and then he goes to Rome. So west goes St. Peter and St. Paul. Okay. Now, how many apostles does it make? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I think I'm missing 2. Yes?
St. John.
St. John, yes, of course. St. John goes kind of north he goes to the Ephesus. He was the bishop of Ephesus. And he was with Our Lady in Ephesus. The Assumption of Our Lady took place from that place. Which apostle am I missing? Yes?
St. Philip and then also St. Luke, because you've got...
St. Philip, he goes to Greece. And who else am I missing?
St. Luke.
St. Luke, yeah, he's an evangelist, but he's with St. Paul. And that's Greece. If you exclude Mark, do we have the whole count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
St. James less?
It's right there.
St. Andrew.
St. Andrew, yes. St. Philip, did he go to Greece? I'm confusing with St. Andrew. St. Andrew definitely went to Greece. I think St. Philip went eastwards, but I'm not sure. Okay? I'll put a question mark there. If somebody could look it up for me and tell me at the next class and help my ignorance. Okay? So it's basically, you see, it's basically the shape of a cross. Okay? How they were sent. Only St. James the Major stays on the spot. And it's moving westward. Yes?
Where was St. Andrew?
St. Andrew, Greece, definitely. He was martyred in Greece. And the relic stayed there until the Crusades was brought to Europe. And Paul VI stupidly gave the relic back to the not yet converted Eastern Orthodox. And but St. Andrew is the apostle of Greece. St. Paul is the apostle of everybody, but he goes more or less westwards. Some traces say St. Paul mentions that he was planning to go to Spain, so maybe he went to Spain. And St. Peter rules the church from day one. So, for instance, in my own church in France, most of France is evangelized by people sent from Rome by St. Peter. Those are the ancient martyrs of France. And you have also a disciple of St. John, St. Irenaeus. He's a disciple of St. John. He was one of the first bishops of Lyon. And there he was martyred under Marcus Aurelius. So the apostles are acting like patriarchs. That is, not only you have apostolic succession, in Rome itself, but they themselves are appointing bishops and they are sending them in their region. Each one of them in their region. So they spread throughout the known world. The known world of that time is spread throughout. Okay. In the case of St. Thomas, is very special because he goes outside of the known world. When they threw the lots, St. Thomas made a prayer, like normally every society priest does. Lord, anywhere but in India. And sure enough, the lots fell on India because he's Mr. Doubting Thomas. So he was sent to doubting India. India was always very confused in religious matters because of Hinduism. Alright? Now, but St. Thomas, there are some sources saying that St. Thomas appeared in America, made brief visits, that didn't have a lasting effect. But there are traces of Christian teachings in some of the myths of the Mayas and the Incas. They say that there are some traces of the passage of St. Thomas. Just like in China, you have traces of Christianity in the early dynasty, the Tang dynasty. They say that there was some Tang Christians, and they were suppressed by the persecution under the Tang dynasty. That's around 600 AD. Also, you had Eastern preachers from the patriarchates of Alexandria or Antioch and so forth. They always sent missionaries during the first millennium eastwards. And also we know that there was trade going on with China, even at the time of the Roman Emperor, because the Romans would consume Chinese silk. And Roman coins were found in the harbors of China. So you could, following the trade routes, you could go all the way to China. And the apostles would use the existing line of communication. Except some of them, who would use angels as line of communication, like I think the eunuch was baptized by Philip, no? It's Saint Philip who baptized a eunuch in the Acts of the Apostle. He's transported by an angel. Right? But I don't think that was their, ordinary means of communication. If it was, they'd probably tell us and we don't have to buy those stupid airline tickets. But since our Lord, they literally fulfill the command of our Lord of evangelizing the whole world. Now there's an interesting book written by Monsignor Gaume, a French bishop. It's not translated into English. And it's called The Apostolic Evangelization of the Entire World. In this book, Bishop Gaume proves that the entire world was evangelized by the apostles. In the case of Africa, most of the African population was around, or the black population was around the kingdom of Ethiopia. The other entities were in touch with that big, large black kingdom of Ethiopia. Now, it is the most successful part of the spread of the gospel, the conversion of Ethiopia to Christianity. And here, Ethiopia remains Christian to this day. Even South Sudan is Christian. Unfortunately, now everybody's confused, everybody's messed up. There are lots of Protestants, not in Ethiopia, but in neighboring countries. But Ethiopia was always the core of Christianity in the heart of Africa. And the coming of Islam did not stop the Ethiopians from prospering, because they simply had to flee to the mountains, and they were better warriors than the Muslims in their own environment. And they were never overrun by Islam. Never. And even now, even today, Ethiopia remains a powerful nation. It intervenes in the affairs of Somalia, for instance. And it had a long war with Eritrea, which is the northern fringe of Ethiopia. So Eritrea, with the help of Saudi money and so on and so forth, it's a long story, seceded from Ethiopia. So it goes back and forth. But it's a major, it was a major part of Christianity. With its own liturgy, with its own rite. When the Portuguese missionaries found them with their own rite, with their own liturgy. And stupidly, they wanted the Ethiopians to drop their liturgy. And that led to a great missionary favor over there. Throughout the Middle Ages, they always talked about in the manuscripts about the Prestre Joam. That is, a king priest of Ethiopia. Because Ethiopia was cut off from the rest of Christianity by the Muslim invasion of northern Africa and the Arabic Peninsula. So they were cut off. So there was always this desire to go and link up with the Ethiopian Christianity. It's one of the reasons why St. Francis Xavier endeavored to go east, to talk to this kingdom of Christians. Now, St. Mark, north of Ethiopia, there is, of course, Egypt. And St. Mark is founded by St. Peter. He founded the See of Alexandria. The See of Alexandria would become also a huge part of the church. At some stage, Africa had 3,000 bishops. North Africa. It was a highly cultured and a highly preserved part of the Roman Empire for a long time. Not until the 4th century does Africa succumb to the invasion of the Vandals. But even there, it doesn't suppress the church. So Africa is a major, Northern Africa was a major part of the Catholic Church for a long, long time. For 1,000 years. Because the onslaught of Islam did not kill all Christians altogether. And the rear areas of Africa remained Christian for a long time. Like in Algeria, what was their name? I forgot the name of the tribe. There's a tribe, they remained Christians until the 18th century and 19th century. Only with the revival of Islam did the Muslims force them to abandon the... what was their name? I don't remember. The famous French player Zinedine Zidane is from their place. And then they were forced to convert to Islam, and France did nothing to prevent them to be forced into Islam. That's one of the big sins of France. But Christianity remained in North Africa for a long time. But before the onslaught of Islam, it was very big. But it was beset by lots of heresies. Like the Donatists, the heresy of the Donatists, the heresy of the Pelagians are coming from, the North Africa, or the Arian heresy is coming from North Africa. So it was a big church, but that church became quickly decadent. And it was beset by heresies. But lots of souls probably want to... And also Egypt was also a center for great holiness. Monasticism started in Egypt. With those monks, these anachorets, living in solitude. St. Anthony of the desert, St. Paul, or the hermit, started great monastic movements in Egypt. It's from them that the Latin Church got its tradition of monasticism, because they are also organized in cenobiums, in cenobia. Also, Africa influenced the monasticism of the church, because St. Augustine wrote the first monastic rule. The first rule. That rule is the basis for the rule of St. Columba, and also the rule especially of St. Benedict. And Africa gave us the greatest father of the church, of the Latin Church, which is St. Augustine, which is so prolific. Because, you must understand that North Africa, at the time of the Roman Empire, was very populated. Compared to the whole Mediterranean basin was very lush. It was very rich. You can see today the cities of the Romans, Lepsis Magna, Cyrene, in Libya especially, but also in Tunisia. You have the remnants of those Roman cities. Those cities are in the middle of the desert. There is no water there. But in the time of the Romans, there was lots of water, and there was lots of agriculture. So the populations in these places was great. So you had thousands of dioceses. Dioceses at the time of the apostles and later on were of a smaller size than today. Possibly, I would believe that we're going to need a more local type of diocese with less faithful pair bishops. It works better. It's more the apostolic system of ruling the church. So Africa was definitely a major part of the Catholic Church for a long time, a very long time. Also, the Eastern Church, so you got two parts in the Eastern Church. You got the Greek side, and Asia Minor, with St. John, St. Philip, all these apostles, St. Andrew. Let me put his name there. The Eastern Church will be number-wise. The Eastern Church will quickly become prevalent over the Latin Church because of the fall of the Roman Empire. But at the same time, during the time of the Roman Empire, the Eastern Church was as big as the Western Church. And you got plenty of rites in the what we say Eastern Church. You got the Syriacs branch. You got the Chaldean rite, which is very interesting. You know why? The Chaldean rite. Why is it interesting?
Because it has much of the icons.
Well, it's like all the Orientals are using icons. It's a very interesting rite because they are using for Mass the sacred language of Aramaic, which is the very tongue of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's why when Mel Gibson made his movie, The Passion of Christ, he used the Chaldean priests to give him the exact pronunciation of the language of our Lord. And you can sense the poetry, the richness of this language. What did I want to say? Yeah, the Chaldeans. And in St. Thomas, when the missionaries came back, they found a fully Eastern rite, of the Syro-Malankar rite and the Syro-Malabar rite. So it's a Syrian rite. It's a Syrian rite. But they were also tied to the patriarchates of Alexandria. So when they were short of priests, they would always call the Patriarchate of Alexandria. And from Alexandria by ship, you are only 3 months away from India because of the winds, the dominant winds that carry you easily to India. So there was always a communication between the Patriarchates of Alexandria and those who are called the Thomas Christians. The Thomas Christians kept the faith for 2,000 years also. That's one of the very consoling aspects of the mission of the apostles. Wherever the apostles went, their work has endured until our times. That's one of the reasons why I guess that Our Lady is crowned with 12 stars. That is, she still shines. The work of the apostles still shines around her head. So this place has kept the faith. The tragedy is Vatican II, is that when the schism of many Thomas Christian entities was solved, they were immediately thrown by false obedience under Vatican II. And they were told by the Vatican to discard their beautiful Eastern rites with the iconostasis. All these rites, except the Latin rite, are using the iconostasis and the complete separation of the faithful from the priest. The Mass of these rites, looks even more sacred, more mysterious than the Mass that we celebrate in the Latin rite. Our iconostasis, the only iconostasis which is left to us, is the language, by which we wrap the whole Mass into mystery. Right? But everybody has his own missal. The most advanced form of iconostasis is the Ethiopian rite, in which the churches are basically sanctuaries. Hardly any faithful enters into the church, and the priest says the Mass in a room which is separate from the room in where the faithful are staying. So even the rooms are separate, and they are veiled. So they faintly hear the priest singing the Mass, and most of them attend the Mass outside the church. And they only approach for the sacraments, for receiving Holy Communion, which they receive, I don't know how frequently. So that's the Ethiopian rite. If you go to Ethiopia, you see those spectacular churches. Do you know about these churches?
No.
No? How are they made? They are carved into the rock. Normally, if you want to build a church properly, it must be made out of stone, because Christ is the stone. So the Ethiopian made very, very strange cross-shaped churches carved into rocks. So you take a big rock place, and you start to carve until the building is made out in one rock. Those are amazing amazing structures.
Lasts forever.
It lasts forever, yeah. That's why, I'm trying. If I succeed in building the church of the seminary in Batangas, I'll have it made out of rocks. But in one piece like that, it's very difficult. It's such a huge work. So, the Christianity of Ethiopia is very, very special, and it's a predominant Christianity because even to this day, the patriarch of the Coptic Church in Alexandria, I'm referring to the schismatic entity, that patriarch is nominated by the Ethiopians. So there was always even the Alexandrians look up to the Ethiopians to this day. One funny guy would follow one Ethiopian custom. In the 70s, there's a singer, famous singer. He was a Rastafarian.
Bob Marley?
Bob Marley, yeah. Rastafarianism is one of the subsects of the Ethiopian rites. Now, it veered into many schismatic branches, one of these being the Rastafarians. And the Emperor of Ethiopia is the high priest of the Ethiopian church. It's very strange.
Haile Selassie?
Huh?
Was it Haile Selassie?
I don't remember his name, but it's very strange. But the main tragedy happens in the early 17th century, where big blunders were made by the Portuguese. There was goodwill on the Ethiopian side when the envoys of the Latin Church arrived, and so they responded positively. But somebody goofed up. And it didn't. There was no reunification. They were cut off by Islam, and they remained cut off afterwards. So, but Ethiopia was detached, I don't think, by any formal schism, by the mere, cutting off through Islam. And in the east, in the west, so Greece, and then in the west, Europe. So Europe is evangelized. Italy is evangelized by Saint Peter, and those that Saint Peter nominates. So Saint Peter sends lots of bishops everywhere. Saint Peter, didn't write as much as St. Paul, but he did as much as St. Paul. He definitely did as much as St. Paul, but by conferring authority to bishops. He sent apostles all across Western Europe, especially in Italy and especially in Gaul. Gaul, which was one of the largest pieces of the Roman Empire. Also came to France in the 1st century AD was 3 interesting characters. St. Lazarus, who took part in the evangelization of southern France, St. Martha and St. Mary Magdalene. You know the story. They were put on a boat to starve on it without water and without food. They miraculously landed in France. St. Martha founded the first cenobium, the first convent for ladies. So it seems that the nuns were around much sooner than the monks themselves. And so St. Martha devoted herself to contemplation, contrary to what we read in the Gospel, when she complains about Magdalene contemplating and her doing everything practical. All right. St. Mary Magdalene went to a cave, La Sainte-Baume, near Marseille. It's a very frigid, uncomfortable, and a humid place. And there she continued to live a penitent life for 40 years until she died. a penitent. So she did 40 years of penance for her sin. So we always insist that Jesus forgave St. Mary Magdalene and so on and so forth, but she did great penance for her sin. And she was buried there, and then for 17th century, visitors could see her skull, the skull of St. Mary Magdalene. She's always represented, in poor clothing in her cave, and meditating in front of a skull. But her skull became also very famous for 17th century, because the visitors could see for 17th centuries the piece of flesh that our Lord had touched with his finger, at the moment of the Noli Me Tangere. Do not touch me. When she said, when she recognized our Lord, she says, Rabboni, Master, and she sprang to his feet, but he touched her, she says, Noli Me Tangere, don't touch me. And that piece of flesh of her forehead became incorruptible, and it was witnessed for 17th century. All the pilgrims in La Sainte-Baume would go up the mountain in order to see the skull of St. Mary Magdalene and venerate the French Revolution, of course, took that relic and burned it, destroyed it.
Where was that cave that she landed in?
La Sainte-Baume. La Sainte-Baume, it's in Le Var. It's in my own place, basically. La Sainte-Baume. Even southern France is more temperate weather than northern France. And when you go to the mountains, start to get cool. But that place is always, it's not that much freezing, but it's always cold and damp. That is, you feel the cold. Sometimes you're better off when the cold goes below freezing and it takes the moisture out. And so when when the sun goes back up, it's nice and more comfortable. Whereas that cave there, even during daylight, and it's facing north, so the sun is always on the other side of the mountain. That cave there is always cold. So she did a very serious penance for her sins. And St. James the Mariner, it's a famous story. He was, while all the other apostles were successful, he was not successful. It's for those who get discouraged in the apostolate. Because you may, in the apostolate, you may strike gold or you may strike nothing. And you may convert maybe one soul for your entire life, or you may convert many more. But the result is not in your hands. But St. James was weeping, because he saw all the other one, St. Paul converting the whole world and everything. And nobody would listen to him in Spain. He did only 2 converts. And so a famous apparition took place, very famous in Spain. You know the name?
Our Lady of the Pillar?
Our Lady of the Pillar. And what did Our Lady say?
That it's a vision of Saint Mark, I forget about.
She said, "Don't worry, my little Jane. These two converts that you've made, they are the ones who will convert Spain, and Spain will become a great Christian nation." And sure enough. Now, what we see in the history of Spain is that same pattern. There's an alternance of great smallness and greatness. So Spain became a big portion of Christianity. Council of Toledo's, Osius of Cordoba. You had great minds in Spain. And then it was overrun by the Visigoths. Also, Visigoths converted, but became more or less quite infrequently heretical kingdom. And then they were overrun by Islam, and they became nothing again. And just a bunch of 50 warriors fled to the Asturian mountains. From there, to them 700 years. It only took, 18 years to be conquered. entirely, but it took them 700 years to expel the Islam. At the end of this little remnant grew into the Spanish Empire, one of the biggest Catholic empire in history. All right, that's it for today. But it's a consoling thing. You know, when we see how it went at the beginning, you see the intent of God is to save all men. Many only are saved, but many are saved. And the message was proposed to all human creatures. Go into the whole world, teach all nations, baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. He who shall believe shall be saved, and he who shall not believe shall be condemned. Simple as that. Threat to states. Now, from the disturbing errors we have described, the greatest dangers to states are to be feared, for the fear of God and reverence for divine laws being taken away, the authority of rulers despised, sedition permitted and approved, and the popular passions urged on to lawlessness with no restraint save that of punishment, a change and overthrow of all things will necessarily follow. These were prophetic words. I mean, he already had plenty of revolutions in his time, but in the 20th century, how many states did you see upturned? Almost every state was upturned. In some places in a very dramatic way, with a great loss of life. Like in the 20th century, Cambodia, out of 6 million population, 2 million were killed by Pol Pot. It's an enormous proportion. And that was within a few years. Within a few years, they were all killed. The cities were emptied because Pol Pot was hardcore communist, and he simply sent the populations to the countryside, there to starve and die. So many states were destroyed, and then and also nations are being destroyed today by the self-demolition, the suicidal birth rate that is taking place. I don't know how Korea is going to survive. I mean, 1.1 children per woman. We can't tell the difference all that much now, but 30 years from now, that country is going to start to disappear, because the demography is not a pyramid anymore. It becomes a kite. That is, it's wider in the old ages, and then at the end people end up dying. So no more pyramid. The normal pyramid is kind of like that. But now the way it is in Japan, and the way it's going to be in Korea, is it becomes the kite. And those are the age brackets, 5 to 10. Age bracket 5 to 10. You hardly see any children, and it's many old people, and then of course medically, at around the age of 90 or 85, then they disappear. But that's how these nations are going. And so the projection for a nation like Japan is, by the end of the 21st century, there will be 50 million Japanese. And there were 140 millions at the peak. Now they are losing maybe, the population of Japan is decreasing 100,000 or 200,000 every year. Every year. They are just simply packing away. And now Korea, what's amazing, Korea is having less baby even than Japan. In the past, Japan would supplement its foreign population by immigrants from Korea. And now it's Korea which is disappearing in its turn. So nations are disappearing, but not necessarily through war. They are disappearing through their through the sheer weight of their own liberalism. Yeah, this change and overthrow is deliberately planned and put forward by many associations of communists and socialists. And to their undertakings, the sect of Freemasons is not hostile, but greatly favors their designs and holds in common with them their chief opinions. So communism has always been supported by Freemasonry. It's just like in democracy, you got these two wings, the conservative wing and the liberal side, liberal wing. These two things work hand in hand. They look like it's a different head. You think it's a different beast, but it's the same beast. The object of communist rule in the 20th century was to wipe out fast the old order. So what Stalin did is what Robespierre and Danton did in France. That is, they crushed, they wiped out all of a sudden, all the traditional structures of the Russian society. And it's a very harsh medicine, but they prefer to do it through lots of blood and intense human suffering, than through progressive reforms, like in the United States. The goal was to wipe out entirely the old order. And then you had very violent communist uprisings, like Bela Kun in Hungary. Bela Kun was a Jew, and then the old Hungary was unrecognizable after the communists had passed. So and financially, the communist states have been propped up by the Western bankers, Western finances. There's always been it's demonstrated that there have always been collaboration between the two. The most famous event in that line is the Treaty of Yalta. The Treaty of Yalta, by which the Western powers surrendered nations, entire nations of Western Europe to the yoke of communism. They always preach, the self-determination of nations. There's no such a thing. The whole fate of Western Europe was decided for all these poor nations who fell under the yoke of communism for a long time. So it's not the nation state that decide anymore. Everything is being decided for them. What type of regime they're gonna have. But in a way, they always maintain a certain balance. That is, the two evil systems of liberal capitalism and communism. These two are always made to coexist. So that even today, communism is not dead. They let it continue in different shapes, but it's not yet entirely gone. And it resurfaces in some countries. Like I'm expecting communism to resurface in the poorer areas of Europe. Because the evils of capitalism are preparing the ground for a return of communism. So it's possible that in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, Greece, there could be a return of communism, of anarchy. And if these men do not at once and everywhere endeavor to carry out their extreme views, it is not to be attributed to their teaching and their will, but to the virtue that divine religion, that cannot be destroyed. And also because the sounder part of men, refusing to be enslaved to secret societies, vigorously resist their insane attempts. So there are some resistance. And there was beautiful example of resistance in the 20th century. So Franco, Salazar, and in South America, plenty of nations resisted the communist onslaught. Brazil was saved, from communism, in extremis, you may say, by Our Lady of Fatima. And you clearly see that in the case of Portugal in the 1920s, that it is not. Freemasonry can be overthrown, because the power of Freemasonry in Portugal, when Our Lady appeared there, was overwhelming. So it is not that the rule of Freemasonry over the world is a necessity. They can be overthrown. They've been overthrown in the past. And then Salazar kept a watch on them. Once he took over, he preempted many attempts of the Masons to retake power over him. But what Salazar did is he kept a watch on them, and also he kept good contact with his people. Salazar was very much loved and accepted by his own people, just like Franco was. And so his rule was very balanced, very Catholic, and also there was a whole social view of things. Basically he applied distributism, and he gave to the Portuguese not a great abundance of wealth, but everybody had a job, everybody had a situation, everybody was owning property. That's what you call distributism, yeah.
Where did the first idea of distributism come from? Who initiated it?
Well, distributism, I think when you read Outline of Sanity, it's just you want to return to the normal order of things.
Was it Chesterton?
Well, the name is coined by Chesterton, yeah, and Belloc, his friend. Mm-hmm. But what they just wanted to do is to free away from this major industrialism and capitalism that was, so overbearing in England. Mm-hmm. Tolkien also dreams about it when he describes the house of Tom Bombadil, or the hobbits, and the way the hobbits are subjected, by the evil creatures. What's their name? I don't remember. And then when Sauron or Saruman extends his realm over the Hobbit village, he makes a big dirty factory. So Catholic thinkers wanted a return to the harmony, the harmony that preceded the revolution.
Is there any downside to distributism?
Well, they've been accused of being communist, which is a calumny. Maybe the wording of Chesterton and Belloc is not perfect, and then they were misinterpreted as trying to get rid of all major corporations and major coalescing of property, which is not what they meant, because you need sometimes to have large propertied elite. Like in Europe, you had great Catholic corporations like BMW. It's run in a Catholic way by Catholic people, or the Michelin tires. Michelin read the encyclical Rerum Novarum of Leo XIII and he followed closely the teachings of the social teachings of the Catholic Church, and so he endeavored to work in harmony with his workers and everything, and then it was just as good, or maybe even better than Toyotism, than the ideal of the Japanese Toyota. You go to Clermont-Ferrand, Michelin opened plenty of schools, built churches, and took care of the welfare of his employees, and the employees in return, stressed the quality, did a good job, and then that became the number one tire company in the world. Yes?
What is distributism?
Well, it's the fact that the government, the taxation regime, must favor families, individual families, so that property is more distributed among the families, and it is less easy for the higher finance to suck the entire wealth of nation and concentrate it in the hands of the bankers. That is, you deconcentrate. That is, you still allow bankers, you still allow big businesses to be, but you don't allow them to grow beyond a certain size. And then especially, you make sure that a father of family acquires wealth easily. So you don't want to have a mass of poor proletarians and you facing a mass of wealthy capitalists.
So who decides how much land a family gets and how much they need?
No, it's done through the regime of taxation. You're gonna tax, you're gonna favor, the fiscal policy is gonna favor the families. You're gonna incite and favor and make it easy for families to own property, to own land. You're gonna favor, like the Mittelstand, you're gonna favor the implantations of families in the countryside.
Isn't it that's the system that the feudal lords used to do?
Yes, it's natural thing. What Charles the Great did, he wanted an empire founded on villages. So Charles the Great says, I don't want no big cities. This is not a Roman Empire. Roman Empire, that's pagan culture, so it always aims for big cities. And Romans did indeed build big cities. Yes.
I was wondering, what if the people do not know how to take care of the land? Like what happened with the Dust Bowl?
No, it's a little homestead. They don't need to be all farmers. It's like the Mittelstand in Germany. You put factories in the countryside. So what you do to discourage factories to be in the cities, you don't allow, you tax them, and you make it easy and bureaucratically easy to establish themselves. You incite them to go to the countryside. Which is Mittelstand. So in the middle of nowhere, you go to Austria and Germany, you see factories in the middle of the countryside. And so the locals go there and they work there. So, especially distributism is the role of the state is to help the family. Is to give the family its normal means of subsistence. That banks should enrich themselves, fine, but with all due balance. Yes. No.
So I was wondering, what if one family becomes, draws the power towards itself, so to speak?
Well, people become rich, it's no problem for distributists. They've been calumniated for that. We do not envy the rich. You need rich families. But not that the people can become rich without having to trample, ordinary families. Good, hardworking, normal people. And there will be always poor people. That we can't deny. But the fact that the wealth of a little industrial elite becomes completely out of proportion with what it should be, that's the problem. And then facing that huge, massive wealth, you have the condition of the worker is horrible. That was in the time of Chesterton. The condition of the workers was truly horrible. They were working 60 hours a week, and they were barely paid to sustain themselves. And so all Catholic thinkers were clamoring for better laws, better working laws, because everything was based on profit. With the English Reformation and with the French Revolution, all guilds and all protections were removed, and that made that prepared communism, because communism had a fertile ground. You neutralize communism by endowing the people with property, by training them how to be owners. That's what Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore. In Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew had slums. Those slums were infected by communist propaganda. So Lee Kuan Yew built, residential apartments, and he did not give away those apartments like a socialist would do. He told the slum dwellers, "Now I order you to buy those apartments, but I'll help you buying them by a flat loan of the state." And so they ended up owning these apartments, these condos, and they became, from the poor swindlers that they became well housed, and especially they became owners with a title of property that was also gaining value year by year, because as the real estate market increases, the owner of that flat has a greater real estate possession, and that killed communism in the bud. That's the same principle as distributism. Is that the role of the state is to facilitate the acquisition of property by the ordinary people. That's the role of the state. Whereas today, a socialist state simply gives money straight to the little ones. But that creates an enormous problem, because it puts the state finances in the red, which in turn puts the state in the hands of the banks, because the deficits and the debt. And on the other side, it creates the dependency of the little ones to the state. People are not incited to be enterprising. They become dependent of the state. The parasites, basically, which it should not be. People must acquire property from their own labor, from their own activity. It's not the role of the state to confiscate money, even from the rich, to redistribute it to the poor. It looks like very nice, looks like Robin Hood, but it's an injustice to the rich, and it's an injustice to the poor. The Catholic way is to teach the people and provide a condition for the people to be able to acquire its own wealth, its own house, its own means of sustenance by their own work. You see? But without the direct intervention of the state. The intervention of the state in this matter is indirect. That is, you have sufficient laws that guarantees that no abuse is being done by the high financials, and that also that it is easy for people to acquire wealth. But I don't think Chesterton had in view the confiscation, of property for the distribution to the families. I don't think it was his view to do it in a forceful way like that. His system was applied by, Margaret Thatcher, did apply that to some extent. She cancelled all these socialist laws of her predecessors, and she tried to endow the population with real estate. And under her, the English real estate climbed and climbed and climbed. So the country became wealthy again. Still, the abuses of capitalism remained, many of them. But it was a much better proposition for England than under the Labour governments that preceded. It's called Thatcherism. She took some of her recipes from Lee Kuan Yew himself. The goal was to enable people to acquire money by themselves. and to downsize the government. And so, but this recipe has been applied in places, and it worked, and it undermined. There was never. Singapore was never had any trouble with communism. Oh. Yes. Would that all man would judge of the tree by its fruits, and would acknowledge the seed and origin of the evils which press upon us, and of the dangers that are impending. We have to deal with a deceitful and crafty enemy, who, gratifying the ears of the people and of the princes, has ensnared them by smooth speeches and by adulation. So always smooth speech, deceitful talk. They always take a pre-existing situation. Subversion always take a pre-existing injustice, which it blows out of proportion in order to destroy the old order. Like the French Revolution causes injustices. It creates a miserable proletariat. From this miserable proletariat, they're going to use that situation in order to promote socialism, to further increase the misery of the people. So, the more people are miserable, the more they are being told it's because revolution is not applied sufficiently. Tomorrow's paradise will come, but only if you multiply those mistakes that have led you into poverty. And people buy those things. We have to deal with the deceitful and ingratiating themselves with rulers under the pretense of friendship. The Freemasons have endeavored to make them their allies and powerful helpers for the destruction of the Christian name. And that they might more strongly urge them on, they have with determined calumny accused the Church of insidiously contending with rulers in matters that affect their authority and sovereign power. So they always try to keep the Church completely cut off from any influence on the social affairs. Whereas the Church and state have always been united before, they separate the Church from the state, so that the state takes no lesson whatsoever from the Church. And then they turn the state against the Church, of course. Having by these artifices ensure their own safety and audacity, they have begun to exercise a great weight in the government of states, but nevertheless, they are prepared to shake the foundation of empires, to harass the rulers of the state, to accuse and cast them out, as often as they appear to govern otherwise than they themselves could have wished. That is, those liberal governments that have thrown off the yoke of the Church become in their turn endangered. Revolution is the eater of its own children. So once you have stepped out of the old order, there is no stoppage. And then there is no stoppage to anarchy and instability. Like the governments of today, with the modern liberal democracy, are always alternating. So there is a constant waste of national resources. And so the energy of nations is being strained. And until until the whole nation or the people are made complete slaves. In like manner, they have by flattery deluded the people, proclaiming with a loud voice liberty and public prosperity, and saying that it was owing to the Church and to the sovereigns that the multitude were not drawn out of their unjust servitude and poverty. They have imposed upon the people, and exciting them by a thirst for novelty, they have urged them to assail both the Church and the civil power. Those were the brutal revolution of the 19th and 20th century. Nevertheless, the expectation of the benefits which were hoped was greater than the reality. Indeed, the common people, more oppressed than they were before, are deprived in their misery of that solace which, if things had been arranged in a Christian manner, they would have had with ease and in abundance. So they don't want us to know, because the rule of Christendom is now so far away, so many centuries away. They don't want people to realize that in olden times poverty was all relative. There was poverty. I mean, it was harder in olden times to make food, so it was more work. So people were in a more frugal condition, but the poverty was all relative. Most of people had a fair deal. You see, in my country, the Vendée, when the wars of the Vendée were a good occasion for us to realize how balanced was the Christian order before the French Revolution. Every Vendéan had his own house, and it was very happy with women and children, and they had property, and they had their own gun, and they would go hunting. The whole population was very happy. And they were, good shots because the Vendéans were good shots because everybody went to hunt. They were very free, and the local nobles were, very detached. They were not an overbearing nobility. And so when there was a problem, when they started to be conscripted, and when the persecution started, the villagers went naturally to see their noblemen to lead them into battle, which they did. There was a great social harmony. It was not an extreme wealth for everybody, but everybody was happy. Everybody had land, everybody had a house, everybody had, plentiful food. And they were a very cheerful type of people. And all over France it was kind of like that. It's the ancient order, yes.
Can it be said that the situation in the Vendée was different from, let's say, what was happening in Paris?
Well, Paris was always brewing bad ideas, and but still Paris was comparatively small to what it became after the French Revolution. Paris was only 300,000 people, or 500,000 at the most at the time of the French Revolution. It was still a small city. So it's only in the 19th century that people are thrown into misery and they flee to the urban centers to find at least a job. So they are all thrown into factories of the Industrial Revolution. But these changes happen after the French Revolution. Before the French Revolution, you have an ideal model which is there. What's surprising, the French Revolution happened in a time when France was very prosperous. Only the finances of the kingdom were not doing that great, there was a chronic deficit. But by that time, all the ministers of Louis XVI and Louis XV were Freemasons. So they probably created those problems. But the country at large was rich. The French pound was a powerful currency. The French economy was the first economy of Europe. Even if the colonial empire of Britain started to become bigger than France, France was the first economy of the world before the French Revolution. Yes.
If things were prosperous, then how could the French Revolution have happened?
Well, revolutions happen when the countries are doing well. Like Russia, Russia was doing all right. I mean, it's World War I, that triggers the Russian Revolution. But Lenin tried a lot to make revolution. The communists tried to make a lot revolution in Russia, but Russia was an emerging power. when the revolution struck. It's only the circumstances of the First World War that allowed the communists to step in easily, aided by Freemasonry. But I wouldn't say that Russia was that miserable. They were very affected by the war. It's the World War I that really set up the conditions for the. But in the case of France, France was rich. The American Revolution is the same. America was doing fine, economically speaking.
But in order for the French Revolution to have been effective, there must have been a great population of people who were against the church in the States.
No. It was 95% of the French Revolution was in favor of the church, and they didn't want to do nothing. It's only the 5% people that led the whole country by the nose. France was very Catholic. Even most of the French bishops did not accept the French Revolution. But they didn't do enough to resist. The population was good. I mean, the nation at large was very Catholic. But there was no reaction from the province. Or if there reaction there was, it was piecemeal. So there was an uprising in Lyon, there was an uprising in Toulon, there was an uprising in Normandy, in Brittany, in Vendée, Bordeaux rose. But those were piecemeal. It was uncoordinated. There was no will of the king to resist the revolutionary process. And that revolutionary process was essentially instigated by the nobility itself. And some members of the clergy, the lodges. But it was completely artificial. It didn't come from the people. The people were happy.
Okay.
Yeah,
Who stormed the Bastille?
They were paid. The Bastille was empty, and it was a manufactured event. They were paid. A local mob in Paris was, risen for the occasion, but it was not, a massive popular. It was a created thing.
Are you saying that the French Revolution was fomented not
by the elites? Yes, not by the people. No.
Not by the Freemasons?
It was fomented by the Freemasons. Yeah.
Okay.
But the Freemason was the whole aristocracy was full of Masons, was loaded with it. Marie Antoinette said everybody is of it.
So that elite was the
strata
of the
yes.
of the Freemasons.
Yeah, Lafayette or whoever it was, I don't remember. They paid a whole bunch of people to do this agitation that led to the taking of the Bastille. But everybody knew there was nobody in the Bastille, and the Bastille was a 5-star prison, with great cooking and, and I mean the place wasn't loaded with political prisoners. It was completely pointless operation. It was done only for cosmetic, to tell the world that there is a revolution going on, basically. But it was completely fabricated event from start to finish. Normal Frenchman never cared, but then a revolution caught up with them. In teaching that from God Himself comes the right of ruling, she adds a great dignity to civil authority, and no small help towards obtaining the obedience and goodwill of the citizens. That's the church favors the throne. The altar and the throne were mutually supportive. It was not always perfect. We are not saying that it was always perfect. There was quarrels, the quarrel of the investiture, because the throne wanted to nominate the bishops. So what you see throughout history in the Middle Ages is more the intrusion of the civil power on the power of the church than the opposite. There's not much, you cannot say much of an intrusion of the Catholic Church into the dealings of the civil powers. You see, you had a line of kings, with a king being replaced by his son regularly. The church would not interfere. The church interfered sometimes at key moments in the beginning of a dynasty, like the Carolingian dynasty. I don't know which, Pope Stephen or whatever, is one who backed Charles the Great. Charles the Great gets crowned, and the church propped that family of Pippin the Short, because the last Merovingians were failures. They were repeated failures. So everybody was longing for a change of dynasty, but nobody would dare to do something for a long time. But eventually, the situation became mature, and then the church played its role into helping that family to take over, and it started the Carolingian dynasty. Again, when the Carolingians failed, then UKP was put in place with the help of the clergy. But it was an obvious situation. There was nothing so forced about it. It was not that the church made a coup to place UKP in his position. And what you see most is more the intrusion of the civil government in the affairs of the church. That's the intrusion, the famous intrusion of Henry II, who wanted to, take over the church property. And he was resisted by St. Thomas Becket. And then later on, this spirals and culminates with Henry VIII. But the church had tremendous wealth. But also the office of the church was also tremendously big, because it covered what sectors? I told you before. What was the job of the church besides worship?
Education.
Education and
Marriage.
hospitals, healthcare.
Healthcare.
So and also welfare of the poor, and all these social. So it was normal that the church had some property. Though it was well understood by everybody. But it was a big temptation at the same time for the civil power to come and loot and steal, the things of the church. And when the goods of the church were confiscated by the French Revolution, it was the same thing as with England. So then you had the creation of a proletariat. Only then. Because before that, people were taken care of. The friend of peace and sustainer of concord, she embraces with all with maternal love, and intent only upon giving help to mortal man. She teaches that to justice must be joined clemency, equity to authority, and moderation to law-giving. That no one's right must be violated, that order and public tranquility are to be maintained, that the poverty of those who are in need is, as far as possible, to be relieved by public and private charity. So the morals of Europe were barbaric. They started with barbaric morals, but then the morals became more and more, how you say that? Not elaborate, but refined. So even even the capital punishment became less cruel. There was less cruelty. It took some time. Or the church, fought against institutions like slavery, tried to ease it out. But things could not be changed overnight. It took centuries for the church, for the Christian civilization, bring about these good manners on those people of Europe. And now we are returning back to barbarity.
Father,
Yes.
I can't remember about what you're saying about the tortures during the Middle Ages. It says that there's an accusation given to Torquemada that he was using punishment as a means of justifying abuse, which is filed by the Jews when it comes to. But from what I've gathered, Torquemada was even though there was no magistrate, there was no judges there was no court during those years.
And it's only the Inquisition that.
It was the Inquisition. That's the only the
ecclesiastical tribunals were much more mild and much more with procedure than the civil courts. The civil courts were much more arbitrary, and also the questioning under duress of the accused was a universal procedure that you find even in Protestant England of the time of Queen Elizabeth. So it was a universally applied thing. There was nothing special, in what Torquemada did. What was special about Torquemada is that his procedure was milder. And also the fact about the Inquisition, throughout all its multi-secular existence, there is only 2,000 documented death sentences of the Inquisition. Most of the sentences given by the Inquisition were imprisonment or house arrest, but nothing more. So it was very mild court, and it does not compare to any of the revolution that happens.
Yeah, but the Jews had escalated.
Well,
propaganda.
Yeah. Jews and Voltaire and the free thinkers of the 18th century. Yeah. It's the archives of the Inquisition. There is Jean Dumont, a French author, want to look at the archives of the Inquisition, and this is very interesting because they really follow scrupulously due process.
Yes.
What a modern thinker does not tolerate is that heresy was viewed as a crime, and the church took the dealing with heresy in its own hands, because if it would leave it to the hands of the secular prince, then a sloppy job would be done, and innocence would be condemned, because the king would cast his net too wide and try to entrap all heretics and kill as many people as possible. Because for the secular princes, heresy was a threat to the public order. Heresies always led to civil wars, immediately. The big lesson in the 15th century, for instance, is the Hussites. As soon as the heresies of John Hus appeared, immediately there was a war.
Oh, wow.
And the Catholic armies lost. It was a bloody war. And so the other monarchs would not tolerate to have the same thing happen in their territory. But the church said, no, leave it to us, the finding of heretics and their containment. And they were contained. One of the most forgotten inquisitors, and the most successful one, is St. Pius V. St. Pius V cleared the entire northern Italy from Protestantism, because Protestantism was coming in Italy just like elsewhere. But he cleared the whole northern Italy. But he didn't do it with a lot of violence. There was hardly anything done. But he simply detected and pursued the heretics, and they never took off. Protestantism never took off because of him. His name was Ghisleri before he became St. Pius V.
Michael Ghislieri.
Yes, yeah. It was very effective. And as a result, Italy didn't suffer the wars of religions that France suffered. The wars of religion devastated, big sections of France. France was crippled by these wars. That no one's right must be known. But for this reason, to use the words of St. Augustine, men think, or would have it believed, that Christian teaching is not suited for the good of the state, for they wish the state to be founded not on solid virtue, but on the impunity of vice. That's a determining principle of the French Revolution, is the freedom to do whatever you like, the freedom to divorce, free love, and all these things. And the revolutionists, the lower, the more vile section of the population, went for it because that's what they wanted. They give away, they lift all the barriers that were set. But knowing these things, both princes and people will act with political wisdom and according to the needs of the general safety, if instead of joining with Freemasons to destroy the church, they join with the church in repelling their attacks. It's the demagoguery of Freemasonry. It progresses by, by breaking the laws, the moral law. So when the population is going from bad to worse, then they end up loving the revolution because their deeds are bad, their moral life is gone. But when the revolution began, when you had the state of Christianity, hardly anybody was interested. It was shoveled down the throats of generations. Like in my country, in France, for over a century, the population would not vote because the revolutionists knew that if the ordinary French people were allowed to vote, they would vote for Christianity. And so you had to have a suffrage censitaire. How do you say that? The voters were those who would pay the higher taxes. So those who paid taxes had the right to vote.
Oh.
So ordinary Frenchmen were prevented from voting. So only at the turn of the 20th century, where the whole of the population began to vote, because the mentalities had begun to shift, and then there was no fear of any. Or there was some, but there was not so much of a fear of a Catholic backlash, from the population. But at the beginning of the French Revolution, it's in no way were the Frenchmen voting. Those representatives of this general states were no representatives of the people. It's not true. They were not voted there by the French people. There was no. It was a census. I don't know how you say that. It's those who had the right to vote were those who were paying the taxes. The French Revolution was a bourgeois revolution, noble and bourgeois revolution. Whatever the future may be, in this grave and widespread evil, it is our duty, venerable brethren, to endeavor to find a remedy. And because we know that our best and firmest hope of a remedy is in the power of that divine religion which the Freemasons hate in proportion to their fear of it, we think it to be of chief importance to call that most saving power to our aid against the common enemy. So first help against it is true religion. If the hearts of man is made good, the enemies cannot do much. That's what you saw in Spain and Portugal. They were kicked out from these two countries because the population was still good and was provided with good leaders. The two conditions must be there. If the population turns bad, revolution has a fertile ground. Or if the population doesn't have any clue, like the Russian population at the time of the Russian Revolution, then a revolution can happen. Therefore, whatsoever the Roman pontiffs, our predecessors, have decreed for the purpose of opposing the undertakings and endeavors of the Masonic sect, and whatsoever they have enacted to deter or withdraw men from societies of this kind, we will ratify and confirm it all by our apostolic authority, That is, all those excommunications, deprival of ecclesiastical burial, deprival of the sacraments, and so on and so forth. Entrusting greatly to the goodwill of Christians, we pray and beseech each one, for the sake of his eternal salvation, to be most conscientiously careful, not in the least, to depart from what the Apostle See has commanded in this matter. We pray and beseech you, venerable brethren, to join your efforts with ours, and earnestly to strive for the extirpation of this foul plague, which is creeping through the veins of the state. So, Catholic nations continue to fight Freemasonry in his time, like Austria and maybe Spain. I mean, but I don't remember which was the political state of Spain at the end of the 19th century. But
Hungary? Was Hungary one of the countries that are fighting?
Austria-Hungary, the Austrian Empire, yeah. They were not affected by Freemasonry until the empire was wiped out by World War I. And trusting, where are we? You have to defend the glory of God and the salvation of your neighbor. And with this object of your strife before you, neither courage nor strength will be wanting. It will be for your prudence to judge by what means you can best overcome the difficulties and obstacles that you meet with. But as it befits the authority of our office that we ourselves should point out some suitable way of proceeding, we wish it to be your rule first of all to tear away the mask of Freemasonry and to let it be seen as it is really. The main instrument of a secret society is in its name, is secrecy. That's the main strength of Freemasonry. So, when, for instance, when Pétain sent the police Rue Cadet in Paris, he took all the listings of the Freemasonry there, all their registers and everything, and he published the name of all the Freemasons. And that was a fatal blow for the sect. There's no better way to hurt them, to neutralize them, than to expose them. Because the saner part of the population doesn't want to be ruled by secret rulers. It's an illegitimate rule. The notion of the state is the res publica. You know, it led to the word republic, but the political society is called the res publica, the public thing. Whereas for Freemasonry, no. The res publica is a private, is a secret thing. They are res-secretarians, you may say. They are not Republicans. For them, the affairs of the state are secret affairs. But that's, by its very nature, that's illegal. The ruling of a nation is a public thing. It is not a secret affair. So if you take off the mask, if you expose them, they are finished. There's nothing they can do. And my sermon is pastoral letter to instruct the people as to the artifices used by societies of this kind in seducing men and enticing them into their ranks, and as to the depravity of their opinions and the wickedness of their acts. So you tear the secret off, and you show the depravity of their actions, their crimes, the crimes that were committed by them, and the evil deeds that they have done, the evils that they have inflicted on the peoples. Once this is done, they also are finished. Just like they are painting the church as a very wicked and evil organization, to cover their own lies and their own wickedness. But it's good that the people are informed and are trained on how wicked the Masons are, and what they bring about is just death and destruction. And they are agents of the hatred of the human race from that Lucifer has. It's
It's a satanic organization. But are people today trained for this? No. It's one of the problems of the XSPX is that it has lost. It's losing very fast. Its fighting spirit against Freemasonry. The school programs don't do much of a mention of the evil of Freemasonry. I don't know about La Salette. Do they really train the boys to know what Freemasonry is, what it does, that it is
Not
a cause?
really.
Not really.
Not much at all.
Yeah. Whereas you have here the Pope wants the people to be trained, wants the people to know. Each one of you, if you make it to the priesthood, you will have to train your people against Freemasonry. You may be running a school, you will have responsibilities, you will have in turn to enlighten people on this. They have to know. Because if they don't know, then they think all those things are normal. All these social changes are normal, and there is nothing we can do about it.
But there's a dichotomy when it comes to that, Father, because there are Freemasons who are engaging in philanthropy, and much of the faithful are confused.
Well, that's part of the training about Freemasonry that Leo XIII says they have a philanthropic appearance.
And then which most of the people are unsuspecting when it comes to the kindness, allegedly kindness of the Freemasons.
Well, the Rotary Club and all this, as Leo XIII says, they do have these humanitarian things, and that's nice, okay, but what comes next is frightful.
And then the second alibi that the Freemasons are using now, inducing people, they're saying that they're not a religion. They would say that. We're just a group.
Yeah, but that motivates us into training the faithful. What are their tricks and what is their ultimate goal? And that they are the origin of both liberalism and communism. Yes.
Funny how you see the proliferation of Masons in the 50s, promoted by television and all sorts of media, and you see a collaborative culture in the 60s.
Yeah, all this is organized by the lodges. One thing after, just like the world wars were organized and decided by Freemasonry. Even, in the campaigns of Napoleon, the Freemasons helped Napoleon to gather intelligence and to get better information as to the positions of his enemies, because they wanted him to succeed and spread revolution all over Europe. When Napoleon was done, then Masonry turned against Napoleon. Just like with the case of Simon Bolivar, they helped Simon Bolivar, and all of a sudden Simon Bolivar invades South America. He's very victorious. But there was a good side of Bolivar. Bolivar wanted his people to be happy and everything. And then they turned against him. And Bolivar had a phrase at the end of his life: "I'm afraid that I have begotten a monster." I don't remember the exact quote. Anybody of you remembers the last quote of Simon Bolivar? There was a good side in Simon Bolivar. But after they used him, they threw him away. So we need to teach, we need to teach the people. In sermons or in writings, it must be understood that they are the ones we are up against. As our predecessors have many times repeated, let no man think that he may, for any reason whatsoever, join a Masonic sect if he values his Catholic name and his eternal salvation as he ought to value them. That is, no one who is a member of Freemasonry can go to heaven. It's major excommunication. Let no one be deceived by a pretense of honesty. It may seem to some that Freemasons demand nothing that is openly contrary to religion and morality, but as the whole principle and object of the sect lies in what is vicious and criminal, to join with these men or in any way help them cannot be lawful. So The end of their ways is evil. It's in the Apocalypse. The locust and the horse is the Apocalypse. They have the appearance of charity. I don't know if we have a scripture here. It's in the Apocalypse. Their poison is in their tail. The front looks alright, but the poison is in the tail, like the scorpion. So locusts come from the bottomless pit. So, and the smoke of the great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke of the pit. That's a confusion of ideas. That's today's indifferentism. That's the air of liberalism that we breathe. And from the smoke of the pit, there came out locusts upon the earth. And power was given to them, as scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded to them that they should not hurt the grass or the earth or any green thing nor any tree. That is, anyone who remains in a state of grace and who has a Christian life cannot be hurt by this man. But those who do not protect themselves by the sacraments and by a Christian life, they are liable to fall under their sway. But only to men who have not the sign of God on their foreheads, who do not carry their cross. So St. John insists the Freemasons cannot do anything against those who have a normal Christian life. But the other ones, they get killed. And they, on their heads they had like crowns of gold. And their faces were like the faces of man. So gold is a metal of charity. So they look like they are good, willing, and charitable. And also their faces like faces of man. That is, they preach humanism, humanitarianism. So their faces like the faces of man. And their hair is like the hair of woman. But their teeth are like the teeth of lion. So they look like very nicey, very sweet, like women, but in fact they are there to kill. Because their teeth are teeth of lions. So their talk is very sweet. But their deeds are very bitter, very cruel. And they had tails like to scorpions. And there were stings in their tails. And their power was to hurt men 5 months. Elsewhere it says that their power is in their mouth. The power of the horse is in their mouth and in their tails. So in the mouth, those lies, this operation of lies of Freemasonry. And in the tails, that is the tail of the scorpion. The poison comes from the rear. You don't see it coming. They use secrecy. For their tails are like two serpents and have heads. So those tails are scorpions, like the heads of serpents, and it comes from the rear of the beast. The front has womanly hair, and the face is like the faces of a man, and it has a crown of charity. So it looks good from the front, but the back is poisonous and dangerous and murderous. And then St. John says, with them they hurt. And so those who do not do penance from their works and are the ones who fall prey of these beasts. St. John says, if Freemasonry is allowed to prosper, it's because too many people don't do penance. And so they are, liable to be influenced by Freemasonry. Okay, how much time do we have left?
Like a couple minutes, Father.
A couple of minutes, yeah. Well, it's basically the end of the encyclical. So I think next week I'll have to give you a test about it. I'll ask you a few questions, like the breakdown, the 5 targets of Freemasonry: marriage, education. All right, and then I'll ask you a few questions. And you can note the reference of the Apocalypse there. It's good for you to know that the Apocalypse of St. John talks about Freemasonry as well. It's chapter 9 of the Apocalypse. Also know the Great Babylon. It's chapter 17 and 18. So the Great Babylon is the project, the end result of the dragon. The dragon also, the beast of the Apocalypse, that's also Freemasonry. One body, several heads. So you got a socialist head, a communist head, a liberal head, liberal democratic head, plenty of different heads. Chopping one head doesn't kill the beast. It's a beast like a hydra. So, and these verses are taking place as we speak. These prophecies are being fulfilled. What's amazing in the Apocalypse is that St. John doesn't leave much to the Antichrist. He talks a lot about our time, I do believe. It's what was written in the past and it was hard to understand in the past is much more easier to understand today. I mean, lots of mysteries remain in the book of the Apocalypse. But there is a great similarity between the Freemasons and those locusts of chapter 9. And what they have worked for was carried out by a beast with several heads, and you could not, get a hold of it. And the established order now is that Great Babylon that St. John described. That is a city built on business, a big, gigantic world order based on business, very bloody and very blasphemous. That's what we have now. Yes?
If these things are the head, what does the body represent? The body of the beast.
The body of the beast?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. I would say the body of the beast, the center of its power is a devil. Those spirits we are fighting. We are not fighting against flesh and blood, we are fighting against those spirits floating in the air. So, but some are, more vital to organs to the beast than others. The Jews are closer to the heart of the beast, I would say, than the Gentile Freemasonry. They are closer to the mystery of iniquity. But the trick is basically, the trick of the beast is that it has several heads. And you don't kill the beast if you just crush one head. It is still not yet dead. And St. John also talks about the pits, the smoke of Satan, the pits of the apocalypse. That is, the air is infected by the tenets of Freemasonry. And it's a city that wants to unite the human race, but not on truth and virtue. The foundation of their union is simply the love of self. That's what they preach, the love of self.
Is that why the harlot of Babylon probably dresses in scarlet?
Scarlet? That's because of the blood she sheds.
Oh, I thought it was scarlet because it's a very prominent color. It's easily seen by people.
Well, I think it refers both to the blood she sheds and to the fact that she pretends that she reigns and that she will not, her government will not fall. She's very self-assured.
Oh, I see.
But she's carried by the beast. She's brought about. The revolution started in blood and all this. The end result is the so-called world order that you have now, which is chaos also. Yeah.
It's interesting that they had an article on Fabrizio about the future of women cardinals, and it said that they were called a scarlet woman.
Yeah. It's more funny than anything else. But yeah, Pope Francis is thinking about it. When is he going to do it? We don't know. Right now they are attacking priestly celibacy. And in Germany you do have now female deacons. That's a fact. So in the Catholic Church you have female deacons in Germany. So they don't want to go too fast necessarily. But the Anglicans did it and everything. But I think the Catholics are going to take more time. But Pope Francis is speeding up a few the things. Anyways, so study that thing. I don't have Bishop Williamson's breakdowns and chart of the encyclical for you to learn, so that you'll be spared for that. But basically, I will ask you a few questions. A very simple test.